Hey guys, it's Lucian, and today I am going to be discussing the books that I read in January. I know this is a bit late, and it's like basically the end of February, but when have I ever been early for a monthly wrap-up? Never. I never get these up on time, so why start now? Anyway, I have 15 books to talk about. I read quite a few books in January, and I'm excited to discuss them, so let's not waste any more time. Oh, also, before I talk about the books, if you're wondering why I look so funereal right now, it's because it is freezing cold in my house right now, and this is the comfiest sweatshirt that I have. Also, it's why the fire is on in the back and why you're hearing like crackling and stuff. So, yeah, that's that. The first book that I read in January, the first book that I read in the year was One Day in December by Josie Silver. I get the irony that the first book I read in January has December in the title, but this is one that I wanted to read at the end of last year, but I just didn't have time, so I just rolled it over into this year because I knew it wasn't like too Christmassy, so it didn't like matter that much. I didn't want to wait until like this winter to read it, so I started the year with it, and I don't know if I'm doomed to give every single book that I start the year with 3 stars, but I give this one 3 stars. It's basically about these two characters. I don't even remember their names. Lori and Jack. And basically they have this chance encounter where they just see each other, like I think it's on a bus or something, and they end up trying to track each other down, and then when they do find each other, Lori finds out that Jack is her best friend's boyfriend. So it's like this whole thing, and it kind of goes from there. It's a romance book. I liked this book. Like, I didn't hate it or anything. I obviously gave it 3 stars, so it wasn't like bad, but I just was expecting a lot more from this. I wanted it to be way more Christmassy and holiday-y, but it wasn't. Like, most of this book doesn't even take place in the winter. It's just kind of like throughout the year, and it kind of goes through all the years, and I just wasn't really a big fan of that. I didn't really care for the characters either, and I didn't really feel anything for the romance, because again, I didn't really care for the characters, and I feel like this could have been such a cool concept, but it just wasn't. Also, this book does deal with cheating, so if you're like sensitive to that, maybe steer away from this, or just like know that going in. So yeah, I mean, that didn't really bother me, but I can see how it would bother other people. So yeah, I wasn't a big fan of this. Will I read Josie Silver's other books? I might. Like, I'm not writing her off completely, but this just wasn't really my cup of tea. The next book that I read was The Baron the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is the first book in an adult fantasy series, and it follows a girl named Vasilisa, and it takes place in ancient Russia in Rus, and basically she has like been told all these kind of Slavic folk tales all her life, and as she grows up, it's kind of like, this book is kind of difficult to explain, but anyway, basically her father ends up marrying a new woman, and Vasilisa kind of finds herself getting deeper into like the actual creatures that are from these stories, and she's kind of like becoming a part of these stories. That was literally the worst synopsis I could have given, but I didn't really know much going into it, and so maybe that's why maybe I'm subconsciously giving a horrible synopsis. But I really, really loved this book. I ended up giving it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. My only complaint with this book is that I was a little bit too slow. Like, sometimes I did feel myself like trudging through it, but by the end, I just absolutely loved it. I loved Vasilisa as a character. I loved getting to see the other people in her family as well, because you do get point of views from them. Not like consistently, but you do see like kind of glimpses into their heads, and I really enjoyed that. I loved the atmosphere of this book. It's all snowy and all of that, and I loved the Slavic folklore because I'm Slavic, so I kind of had like known these stories, and it was just really fun to see, and I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I loved the writing so much. Catherine Arden's writing just like blew me away, and I cannot wait to get to the other books in this series. It's a trilogy, so there are 2 more books left, and yeah, I just absolutely loved it. I loved all the character interactions, and it was just such a slow progression of plot, and I really, really like when stories do that, so it was really great, and it's great for the winter time as well. The next 2 books that I read are part of the same series. It's a duology, and that was The Crown's Game and The Crown's Fate by Evelyn Skye. I read another Evelyn Skye book last year, Circle of Shadows, and I wasn't really the biggest fan of it, so I was kind of reluctant going into these books because, like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. I really didn't like that other book. I don't know how I'm going to feel about her other series, but I really, really loved this series. Usually I don't talk about series together, but my thoughts on these two books are like very, very similar, so I'm just talking about them at the same time. I ended up giving them both like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really, really loved them. Basically, this story follows two main characters, Vika and Nicholas, and they are like enchanters and they have magic and they live in Russia in 1825. And basically in Russia there's this thing called the Crowns game where there are like these enchanters that come together to duel to the death because there can only ever be one enchanter in Russia at a time, and whoever wins will become the imperial enchanter to the Tsar of Russia. And then they end up getting into the Crowns game and things kind of go from there. And then the second book picks up where the first book left off. It's much, much darker and it kind of is like very different. Like the two books are very different, but I really, really liked both of them. I liked how they were kind of like the yin and yang to each other. So yeah, I really, really loved these books. I really liked the characters, which is surprising because again, in Evelyn Sky's other book, I did not care about the characters at all, and the plot didn't interest me, and I didn't care for the writing either. But in this book, it was totally different. The plot kept me guessing. It had really short chapters, so you kind of just like felt compelled to keep reading. And it was just like really high stakes. If you didn't like how slow Three Dark Crowns was, I think you will really, really like this series because it is kind of similar to that in that it's like a magical duel to the death. So yeah, I really, really liked this. And just I loved the Russian atmosphere and all the historical stuff. And it's clear Ellen Sky really did her research, and I really liked all the characters. We don't just get Vika and Nikolai's. Did I say Nicholas in the beginning? It's Nikolai. Vika and Nikolai's points of view. We also get Pasha, who is the crown prince of Russia. We get his sister Yuliana. We get some other people that like kind of come in and out of the story. And yeah, I really, really liked it. And it was just very high action and high drama. So if you need a series that you can kind of just binge, because it's very, very quick, definitely pick up The Crowns Game and The Crowns Fate. I don't really have any like active things that I actively disliked in these books, but they just didn't really feel like 5 stars to me. Like they were just, you know, when you read a book and you're like, that was really good, I can't tell what I didn't like, but I just know it's not like a favorite. So while I did really enjoy the series, it's not like an all-time favorite of mine, but I'm really glad that I read it, and I would definitely recommend it. Then, after finishing that series, I picked up Gilded by Marissa Meyer. This is the first book in her new ongoing series. It's duology, and it is a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, and we follow a main character named Serilda, who is like a miller's daughter, and basically she was cursed in this world by this god of lies. And so one day she says that she can spin straw into gold, and she's basically taken to the Earl King, who is the ruler of this kingdom, I guess. And he tells her to spin the straw into gold, or else she will be killed for telling falsehoods. And when the first night comes and she has to spin all this gold, a phantom appears who lives within the castle and kind of tells her that he will spin the gold for her in return for something. I'm not going to say what. And we kind of go through that. It's a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, so I'm sure you can kind of guess a little bit where the plot goes. But I definitely enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. I loved the atmosphere of this book. That's probably my favorite part. Just the way that Marissa Meyer wrote it. I loved all of the German mythology and the folklore. And it's just very dark, and it's kind of like a gothic novel almost. It's just really, really dark and kind of like haunted. It's like not scary or anything. It's not a horror book, but it's just very like haunting, I guess. Like kind of like Phantom of the Opera, like those vibes. And I really, really enjoyed that. I really did like I liked the story. I do think it was really, really slow though, so I feel like I liked the overall like trajectory of the story and like kind of the main plot points that happened. I do just think it was a little bit weighed down by some filler stuff that was added in. Like this book is 500 pages. It does not need to be that long. It could easily be like 350, 400, especially since this is the first in a duology. And Rumpelstiltskin is a really, really short story. So yeah, I think honestly, my Goodreads review will kind of go more in depth than I'm about to now, just because I wrote that like right after I read this book, and I was kind of fresh with my feelings and my thoughts. but it was good. Like, I enjoyed it. I didn't really care too much for the characters, but I did, in the end, start to like them a little bit more. But yeah, I think the main thing that I liked about this book were the like mythology aspects and kind of like the folklore, and the setting was really, really interesting as well, as I said. And the plot was like overall an interesting part of the story, even if it wasn't like my favorite part, and even if I think there would have been some things that could have been better. So overall, I do think this was a good story, and you know, it was Marissa Meyer, so it was obviously really well written. But I am definitely, I think, more excited for the sequel, because I think the sequel will improve on things that I didn't really like so much in this book, because this book is just like really cyclical and repetitive because of like, you know, the things with the knights, and then she kind of keeps escaping the castle and being brought back to the castle, and it was just like very repetitive, as I said. So I think the second book will improve upon that, and yeah, I think I'm really, really excited to see where the second book will go, especially after how things left off in the story. Next, I read A Vow So Bold and Deadly by Bridget Kemmerer. This is the third and final book in the Cursebreaker series. The first book was A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which I read last January. The second book is A Heart So Fierce and Broken, which I read last summer, and I actually have a whole vlog where I talked about it. And then this is the final book. I really, really like the Cursebreaker series. It's a very like solid fantasy series to me, and I was really excited to get into this book. I got it for Christmas, and I definitely enjoyed it, and just giving it like a 3 stars, just kind of like, you know, 3 stars exactly. I enjoyed it overall, but I think just this one is easily like the worst one in the series, or the weakest one. A lot of this book is just like war strategizing. Like the first 300 pages of this book are agonizingly slow. We're kind of just like sitting in the characters' heads, and you're like going through their POVs, but nothing is really happening until like the very end of this book, which I think the last 100 pages were like a lot better and really, really interesting, but I don't think they would have brought it up anything past a 3 stars. I don't think it's like actively horrible. Like, I wouldn't give this a 2 or anything, but I just think that there could have been so much that Bridget Kemmerer could have done with this book, and if she wanted to have this story, like, she should have made it a lot shorter, because it did not need to be like 400 pages long. So yeah, that is kind of my thoughts on that. I did still really like the characters. I really liked the worlds. I really like the way Bridget Kemmerer writes and how she creates her fantasy worlds. It was good. Very, very slow though until like the end, but you know, it was still like a solid finale, and I did like the way that it ended up, even though I did predict one of the things that happened. And I also will say, the main villain in this story, I did really like her in the first 2 books, but in this book, she was like so cartoonish and like mustache twirling. Like, she just would like come up. She would just like appear out of thin air and be like, "You guys suck and you're dumb." And they'd be like, "We're gonna defeat you." And she'd be like, we'll see about that." And then they'd have so much time to kill her, and then she would just like evaporate. It was kind of dumb and weird, and I didn't really understand that. But apart from that, I did still like this book, and I would still recommend the series as a whole, even if this wasn't my favorite. Next, I read Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna McGuire. This is the 7th book in the Wayward Children series. I like this series. I kind of just reading them as they come out, and this book, I can't really talk about it because it kind of spoils things in other books, but we basically end up exploring a different book, a different school, because in this world, there are people that travel through doorways into other dimensions, and they end up, when they come back to Earth, getting sent to Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children to kind of be snapped back to reality. And in this book, we explore a different institute that kind of aims to do that same thing, but in a very different way. I liked that, and I liked kind of like the plot of this book, and I did like the character more than like I have with some other installments, but my thoughts on these books are like pretty similar. Like, my thought on this book is pretty similar to my thoughts on the other books. Like, it's a consistent series, I can say that. It's just these stories are way too big to be fit into the small page count. Like, each one is 200 pages at most, and it just, like, these stories are so vast and expansive, it just doesn't work into that like small novella format. So that's my main issue with all these books. they're still good. I don't really have any thoughts on them though, so yeah, they're good. I'm gonna keep reading them, but I'm never gonna be like super excited about them, and I can't really see myself loving any of them just because of the format of the series as a whole. Next, I reread one of my absolute favorite series of all time, and that was the truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. I reread these books every single year and like every single January. I love them so much. I've talked about them so many times on my channel, I feel like I don't need to go into them again, but just a brief synopsis. This book takes place in two timelines, one in 1936. We follow Albert Ellingham, who is the proprietor of this like really large academy where he kind of, it's like learning is a game and you can go for free if you have like if you're a prodigy or if you have like a really great talent. That's the same thing. I just said the same thing twice. It's fine. And basically, one night, his wife and daughter are kidnapped. Soon after, his wife's body is discovered, but his daughter is never seen again. The case went cold, and then it was kind of like forgotten about. And Stevie Bell, who is in present day, ends up going to Ellingham Academy, and she is determined to solve the murder. While she's trying to solve the murder from the past, a murder happens in the present, and she kind of has to figure out what the heck is going on. And I love this series so much. It's, again, one of my absolute favorite series of all time, and nothing can ever compare to it. It's just like, I love this series in a way that I don't love any other series. I don't know if it's my absolute favorite series of all time, like my number one, but it is definitely up there. I love it so much. It's one of the best mysteries I've ever read. The writing is amazing, the characters are amazing, the atmosphere is great. It takes place in Vermont, and it's just so amazing. If you have not picked up this series, please do. It's totally worth it. Then I read Graceling by Kristen Cashore. This is the first book in the Graceling series. And this book follows a girl named Katza who is born into this world where there are people called Graces who have these extreme abilities, and she has the gift of death, so she can kill anyone and anything. And basically what happens is she ends up becoming involved with this prince, and then there's political drama that's going on, and she has to kind of like take down this king, and then she ends up going through like on this journey throughout the kingdoms. And I enjoyed this book. I gave it like a 3 out of 5 stars. I liked the main character, and I did really like the world that was set up. I think my main complaint with this book is that it was just way too long. It's like 470 pages. It could have been 300. I am really not a fan of books that are just like traveling. Like, I find that so incredibly boring. And if that's like a major plot point in the book, just like traveling, it will easily just like turn me off from reading the book. And I didn't know that that was a huge part of this book. Like, the entire middle is them just like going through all the kingdoms. So that wasn't my favorite part, but I did really like the characters and how they were like built up, and I liked the romance, because this is kind of like a standalone, because each book in the series is like following a different character and a different story. So I liked how self-contained this book was. And I did like the overall, again, kind of with Gilded, I liked the overall story and the overall plot points, but just like the way that they were kind of connected and all the filler content was not my favorite. So I really liked that, and again, the world was super cool, and I really liked the whole idea of the Graces and everything. It's just that, again, some of this book was not my favorite. I will definitely continue on with the series because I want to see what happens, and I did, again, really like the world, and I think it's cool how each book kind of follows a different character at a different time, and I'm really excited to see where the rest of the series goes. Then I read I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. I got an e-arc of this book. It just came out on February 1st, and I read it a little bit early. And this is a historical fiction book that takes place in the late 1980s in Romania during the reign, I guess, or rule of Nicolae Ceausescu. Is that how you pronounce it? I always forget how to pronounce it, but he was like a Romanian dictator. And in this book, we follow a boy named Christian who ends up being hired, or like, I guess, put on a mission by the agent that works at his high school, in order to, like, so Christian will basically spy on this American family that's in Romania in exchange for medicine for his ailing father. So it's kind of like a thriller almost. It's like a spy thriller-ish, and I really, really liked this book. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I love the way Ruta Sepetys writes, and just the way that she can completely transport you into another period of time, into another country, place. Like, it's just the way that she can do that. Like, she should write fantasy books, because the way that she is able to, like, completely take you somewhere else in the world and in another period of time. It's just like so good, and I love how vivid this book was. And I really liked Christian as a main character. I liked reading about his inner conflicts, and I did really like the story. I think it was like a bit slow. Like, I wouldn't necessarily call this book a thriller because I wasn't like on the edge of my seat. I did find myself like wanting to read, and I did really like reading the book, but I wouldn't say it was like a traditional thriller. I have seen that like word being thrown around. I wouldn't categorize it as that, but I do think, however, that it was like really compulsively readable, and I did find myself wanting to continue on with the story, just because it was so well written and so like fascinating. I also really liked how illuminating this book was. Like, it shined a light on a period of time that I have not heard about, that I have not like really learned about in school. Like, most of the dictators we learned about were like Hitler and Stalin and a little bit of Mussolini, not anything, like, not this man Ceausescu, not the dictator in one of her other books. What was his name? Francisco Franco. We did not learn about that, and I just really liked how this book was kind of trying to shed a light on those things. My only qualm with the book is that it was just so short. Like, this book is under 300 pages, and there were so many times where I found myself being like, oh, we could have expanded upon that, or oh, that could have been like extrapolated upon. And so I didn't really like that too much, and I think this book definitely could have been longer. And also, as like vivid as this book was, I was longing for a few more descriptions, just because I really like the way Ruta Sepetys writes, and I feel like this book was very much just like, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. So yeah, it was really good overall, and I would really recommend it. It's not my favorite Ruta Sepetys book, but I did really, really enjoy it. Then I read Dumb Witness by Agatha Christie. This is a mystery book. Obviously, it's Agatha Christie. And this follows this really rich older woman who ends up tripping down the stairs, and after that, she doesn't die from that, but she ends up tripping on like her dog's ball that's at the top of the stairs, and she falls down the stairs. And then a few days after that, she ends up dying, and the suspicious thing is that Hercule Poirot received a letter from her, and she was like, I don't feel safe, I feel like something's gonna happen. And it was actually postmarked before she died, but he received it after she passed away. So it's kind of like this tangled web, and he tries to figure out who done it. And I really, really liked this book. I found it super addicting. I liked how, even though this is the longest Agatha Christie book I think she ever published, it's so, like, again, compulsively readable, and I think it's just so, like, engrossing. So I really liked that. I loved the family dynamics and all that stuff. I feel like the character work in this book is especially good. Agatha Christie's always good at creating characters, but I feel like this one was especially good, and I really liked all of those, and they all kind of had a motive, and it was just so interesting, and it was like, it was interesting in a way that some of her other books haven't been for me. And I really liked, like, just, again, I feel like even the victim of the story, who you saw in the first couple of chapters, was really well developed. I really liked how this book, like, the first couple of chapters are kind of almost like a prologue, and then you go to Hastings, who is in first person, and he's with Poirot as he's trying to solve the mystery. I really liked that. And I just really liked this book overall. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, and it was just a really, really fun mystery, and I really liked the way it wrapped up. I thought it was so good. It was kind of like a puzzle, and it was just, I loved all the clues, and I feel like this would definitely be a fun one to reread. Then, we're almost done, we're at the second to last book. I read With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a contemporary book that follows a teenage mom named Imani who loves cooking, and she ends up joining this class at her school that's a cooking class, and eventually she ends up going on a class trip to Spain, and she kind of is like also having a romance as well. Like, there's not much of a plot to this book, so I'm kind of struggling to find a way to describe it to you, but I did like this book. I wish I could have enjoyed it a little bit more. I still gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was good, but I feel like there were a lot of things that could have been better. Like, I liked Imani as a character, but this book is just kind of, like, there's not much to it. There's no, like, there's nothing driving the plot forward, there's no momentum. I kind of had to force myself to read this book because there was nothing, like, grabbing me. Like, I liked the characters and I liked the writing, but there wasn't anything that, like, had me hooked onto the page. So that was my main issue with it, but again, I think it was a really good contemporary book. If you need something to just read while you shut your brain off, this would definitely work. I read this during my midterms week, and it was great for that. So overall it was a good contemporary, but I just don't really feel like I have much to say on it. And then the last book that I read in January was We Free the Stars by Hafsa Faisal. This is the sequel to We Hunt the Flame, and it is the finale to the Sands of Arawiya duology. I definitely liked this book. I ended up giving it a 4 stars, but there were like, this is weird, where like at the end I was like, oh, that was a 4 stars, but I didn't feel like it was a 4 stars while I was reading it. Again, I've said this before when I read We Hunt the Flame. I love Hafsa Faisal's writing. It is like some of my favorite writing out there. I absolutely love it. And I absolutely love the world that she created. I love all the like Arabian influences and kind of just like the Middle Eastern stuff that's like infused through the book. I really liked that. And I do really like, I feel like I've been saying this a lot, I like the overall plot of the book, even if I didn't like all of the steps that it took to get from like one plot point to another. And yeah, I also, my other thing with this series is that I just don't really care about the characters, and this book especially is very character driven. I know it sounds like I didn't like this book, but I did. I really liked, as I said, the writing and the world and the plot, and that was kind of driving me through. This book honestly felt like 2 books into one. Like, the first section of this book, it's like part 1, part 2, part 3. Part 1 was like the first 300 pages of the book, and it was like, it honestly felt like an entirely separate installment. Like, it had a beginning, middle, and end. And then part 2 and 3 were kind of like picking up and then finishing that off. So that was a little bit interesting to me, and I definitely liked, as I said, the plot and just kind of how things wrapped up, and I really, really loved the world. I think it's so fascinating, and I love how there's like all these different caliphs and caliphates and all of that stuff. And I liked the villain in the story. I thought they were interesting. And yeah, so just my main issue with this series is that I just don't really care about the characters, but I think like as a whole this is a really good series, and I'm kind of like, I found myself struggling to talk about my feelings with this book because like I overall liked it and I gave it 4 stars, but I feel like when I actually think about it, like it's not 4 stars, but it is. Like, I don't know, I have a very complicated relationship with this series because I feel like I like it overall, but like I can't pick out specific like reason. Like, I don't know, it's like so difficult to explain, and I'm sure you can tell because I like don't know what I'm saying. But overall, it was a fun series, and I really liked how everything wrapped up especially. And while I do think this book was too long and that some things were a little bit too slow, I do think that, again, the overall arc of the story and the trajectory was really, really interesting. And just, it definitely kept me engaged. Like, I felt compelled to read this book, even if the characters weren't, like, a driving force or a driving factor in that. I feel like, I said this in my Goodreads review, this is very consistent with the first book, so I feel like if you didn't like the first book, maybe don't bother picking this one up, because it's very similar to that, and I feel like if you loved the first book, you'll love this one as well. I found myself having very, very similar feelings towards this book as I did with the previous installment. But, yeah. This was a pretty solid series, and I'm definitely excited to see what Hafsa Faisal writes next, especially since it takes place in like the same universe as this book does, so that'll be very interesting as well. But that is it for this wrap up. Sorry it was like kind of all over the place. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you. But that is it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. I'd love to know what books you read in January, and if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, I'd love to know your thoughts. But yeah, that is it. All my social media links are in the description box below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!